Welcome to Suncoast In Depth. My name is Brett Watson, and I have here again with me my good friend Raymond Moody.
All right,
Thanks for being here.
Thank you all so much, and thank you, Brett, for inviting me again.
Oh, it's always more than a pleasure, man. I mean, I had read your stuff years ago and had followed you on YouTube and so on. So it's just kind of a surreal experience for me, honestly, to have you live in 5 minutes from me.
Yeah, everything is surreal. Once you start thinking about it.
Once you start thinking about it.
God is just pretty amazing.
Yeah.
It's Georges Bataille said, nonsense is the end result of all sense. As soon as you start thinking of anything, you quickly get down to things that make no sense whatsoever.
Yeah. Okay. So, nonsense. I want to talk about this again because I know it's a big topic, but can you just give us a kind of
thumbnail sketch
of what you mean when you say nonsense?
Yeah. Well, logic and philosophy of language were my shticks in philosophy. And as we all kind of know, everybody knows there's two domains of language, the literal and the figurative. But what is more accurate is that there are three domains, the literal and the figurative and the unintelligible or nonsense. And Plato was aware of all three domains. He was the first person to draw the distinction between the literal and the figurative, and he was also formulating the properties of nonsense, which does have its own properties. And so what happened in the history is that Aristotle codified logic, and Aristotle was what we would today call a severely obsessional person, probably, and that was too much of nonsense. That was beyond his. So he formulated logic based on the literal domain of language. But nonsense has its own logic too, and in terms of the spiritual life, which you and I are, fascinated by, nonsense has been a spiritual modality in many religions. In the Christian tradition, it's glossolalia, where people utter nonsense syllables drawn from their own language, put together in a way to avoid meaningful combinations or grammatical structures. And what this does, because I've tried it myself, you don't have to be in a religious ceremony to do it. It's just a matter of letting yourself go, and you just start uttering nonsense syllables. Well, you don't have to be in an ecstatic state to get into it. You start it, but after a few minutes or after a while, you do get into an ecstatic state. I can easily imagine how that would, people would be in a more ready state to receive God in that ecstatic state.
So what do you think is happening in the brain that...
Well, this sounds so bizarre, but, Brett, I don't know. Brains, I'm a medical doctor. I've held brains in my hand. But, to me, as a friend of yours was saying, consciousness is where it's at. And the brain to me is a projection of consciousness. I had this conversation 5 or 6 years ago with my friend Eben Alexander, the Harvard neurosurgeon, and I was saying, I think the brain is a projection of consciousness rather than the other way around. And he said, right on. Yeah, and the older you get, the more you realize there's something sort of incoherent about physicality. It's I've never been a physicalist because David Hume said, as to the impressions which arise from the senses, in my opinion, it is utterly beyond the power of reason to determine whether they arise from the objects or from the creative power of our mind or from the author of our being. And as a kid, I realized it wasn't the first one because, what do they tell us about seeing that green cup on the table over there, right? They say the light from those light fixtures comes down and bounces off that cup and into my eye. It's refracted by the lens onto the retina where the rods and cones are tickled up, and they change rhodopsin into a different form, which creates some electrical impulses, which zoom up your optic nerves into the occipital lobes and all that. And the idea that that's what I'm seeing right there is how it really is. It's like when kids play that game of rumor where you whisper a message into one kid's ear, and by the time it gets to kid number 5, it's totally indecipherable.
Yeah.
And I think, I've never been able to muster up a conviction that there is a physical world. I love physics. I study astronomy, but, it's part of the conscious framework is what I think of.
Mm-hmm.
And
but have they done any brain imaging?
Yeah, I think
That's
they
good.
have, but I don't remember. I think somebody did put people in a scanner who were doing glossolalia, and I think the result was that it recruited different parts of the brain. I forget, but also in for example, the Zen Buddhism, the koans are nonsense, right? Like, what is the sound of one hand clapping?
Right.
I have a very I guess eccentric and amazing and wonderful niece who had a double major in philosophy and international finance and got a 4.0, and who was, when she was 11, she looked at me and my wife and she said, "I've concluded I couldn't kill anybody," which is, I guess shows she had been thinking about it. But I think she is a good example of this kind of person to me, who can be in two realms at once. She's very, and so I forgot where I was going with that. So what was I saying?
Well, I had asked if there had been any brain imaging research on people that were speaking in tongues.
Yeah, and I forgot what. I was, in terms of the koans.
Oh,
but,
right.
Yeah,
the
and
koans,
it's
yeah.
like they say, what is the sound of one hand clapping? And so, Kate and my wife and I were sitting around. She was a little girl, and I was saying that, like, what is the sound of one hand clapping? And she saw flapping her wrist like this, and it made it. But anyway, it's nonsense to say, But, and then also I know I don't know much about the Indian religions, but I know that in one of their holy writings they have stories that are involved erasure. And it's like one of them is the story of 3 non-existent princes who were born in a town long before it was constructed, and long after their relatives had died,
Yeah.
and they went into a forest, and as you go along, everything is kind of erased. And what is, I'm not a theologian person, but my sense of what that's all about is that it shows the vaporous quality of consciousness. Like one thing just sort of floats into another thing, and it's a constant changing field. And so what I'm getting at here is that nonsense is a domain of language that has had profound spiritual purposes over the years. And, the abecedarius, Brett, is a form of literature that we all know from Barnes & Noble in the kids section in the back. Those ABC books, right? Like A is for apple and Z is for zebra. And there's hundreds of them. I mean, it's just, and today we think of that as an entertaining way of teaching our kids their ABCs. But if you go back to the time of the Bible was being assembled, or even before that, the abecedarius was a profound spiritual modality of language. I think there's about a dozen of them in the Old Testament alone, most famously the 119th Psalm. And these were not for kids, entertaining kids. These were for conveying holy prophecies or communing with the gods. And Dr. Seuss made a nonsense version of an ABC book because, you know, they used to all end in zebra, right? So, in Dr. Seuss's Abecedarius, he said, "In the places I go, there are things that I see that I never could spell if I stopped with the Z. I'm telling you this 'cause you're one of my friends. My alphabet starts where your alphabet ends." And you know what better description of the situation of a mystic who,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
that's right.
He must have been one.
Well, he was. When he was in 55 or so, he had been to Dartmouth, so in 55 or so they gave him an honorary doctorate at Dartmouth, and he in his acceptance speech he said, "Good." He said, "Now I can call myself Dr. Seuss." But he was a very interesting character.
You know, you were talking about the Cohens and Hinduism is a
Erasure.
very large umbrella for a number of different traditions. But the Cohens, in fact, again, Richard Rohr talks about spending time with the Zen Buddhists and in their monastery, learning their forms of meditation, right? So he sat for, I forget how long, an hour or so. He said, I couldn't sit in the lotus position, so I just sat there.
That's right.
And he said, and then all of a sudden a bell gonged or a gong rang, and all the monks got up, all the Zen monks got up, and they ran off to their spiritual masters. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know what they were doing. I just sat there, but they were going to receive their Cohen. And so the masters would hand them the Cohen, and they were to go and contemplate the Cohen for however long, and then come back with their answers. Answers to the unanswerable, to the unintelligible. And all of that was, as he explained anyway, expanding their consciousness.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
It really expands your consciousness.
And then the I forget his name, maybe you'll remember, the guy that the Beatles were in love with for a while, the Indian guru.
I don't remember.
Anyway, he that guru, I believe it's the same guy. He started the transcendental meditation movement, and in that form of meditation, you're to come up with a mantra, but the mantra should not be anything that you can associate with anything sensical.
Yeah, that's right.
It just has to be nonsense.
Yes. A Swami told me that too. He was talking about in their chants, I asked what this is, and he said, well, it doesn't mean anything. It's just to put in there to, make your mind. And, if there's anybody old enough to remember doo-wop music, that was a combination of nonsense syllables, sha-na-na-na-na, sha-na-na-na-na, together with meaningful parts. Mm-hmm. And who can deny that changes your consciousness? When I was a professor of philosophy, I had a stack of 45s of doo-wop music and a portable record player. And I would take them to my philosophy classes. And the point was to talk about how nonsense can interact with elements of meaningful language to create something that's even more powerful.
Powerful in what sense?
Well, in the sense that it changes your consciousness. Mm-hmm. And, for example, everybody knows hickory-dickory-dock. The mouse ran up the clock struck one, and down it ran, hickory-dickory-dock. And so it's the combination that creates the power, because if you say the mouse ran up the clock struck one, and down it ran, that goes nowhere. It's the combination of the nonsense and the meaningful parts that creates the power. And that's why doo-wop music is so powerful. There was one I used to play, and it was called Little Star, and I noticed that it put students right into a trance just as soon as you started playing it, because the kids that were more, relaxed, you'd see their eyes fluttering as soon as it started. So, but this was the same formula that shamans used to propel themselves over to the other side. So doo-wop music really has the same structure as shaman songs. And a shaman song consisted of nonsense syllables and meaningless refrains, like hickory dickory dock would be a meaningless refrain, right? Put together with elements of meaningful language so that the combination is puts you into trances. I mean, it really does. This is not kind of thing you could do in a day, but I mean, you can train yourself over a period of time to actually kind of transport your consciousness over to some other realm. I mean, I can do it, but I don't know what it means. But definitely, you can create experiences for yourself by creating a shaman song or some other device like that.
You know, if you were to visit Suncoast on a Sunday, there's a time of music. It's a very simple liturgy, if you will.
Yeah.
There's a time of music,
Yeah.
about a half hour, and then there's a half-hour sermon. Okay. Mm-hmm. But during the music, and music is a weird thing. Its effects on consciousness, very powerful.
Yeah.
You'll notice that people, you know, they what we would call worshipful, right? All of a sudden they're in some kind of a trance,
yes.
and they're connecting with at least the ideas of the divine, right? But you can go to a rock concert by Ronnie James Dio or Black Sabbath, and people will be they'll be reacting to that music the same way.
Yes, ecstasy.
Yeah.
That's correct.
And in so many of these songs, whether they're worship songs, doo-wop, or just, you know, rock ballads or jazz. Well, jazz has scat. Yeah. You can see nonsense playing a role in all of it.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is good. This is what I wanted you to do. I wanted you to, you know, show us what you mean when you say nonsense, because I think the average person, you know, they're going to hear that and they're going to be like, they might write it off.
It's a pejorative term,
yeah, it is.
Right?
Yeah.
But you got to get beyond this. The pejorative is just a restrictive sense. It's technical, but what nonsense means in the dictionary is nonsense is language that is unintelligible because it's meaningless. And it's a big part of life, but, you know, because we don't like the word nonsense, we seal it off. You know, in terms of what you were saying about music, Brett, something that is not very well known, but is nonetheless completely confirmable by anybody, essentially, is that, you know, everybody knows what near-death experiences are, and they're very common. But another event that takes place quite often during the terminal events is what I call the swan song phenomenon. And this was first described to my knowledge by Plato in the Phaedo. And by the way, the Phaedo is you can look this up in any history of religious studies, but the Phaedo was the basis of the Christian theology of the afterlife, because when the church was getting together, they didn't much to go on. So, but Plato was available, so the Phaedo of Plato was kind of the basis of the Christian theology of the afterlife. And in that book, when it's on the day that Socrates was executed, and his friends are coming into the prison early in the morning because they know he's going to be dead by the end of the day. So, and the first question out of their mouths is, Socrates, what's this we hear about you becoming a songwriter in prison? Right, and the backstory of this is that Socrates was always down on music. He thought it was for idiots and the trivial. You know, it's like we wouldn't allow that in the ideal society. And so, but anyway, now he's facing death and he's fancying himself a songwriter. So maybe he's slipping, and so they bring it up, and he said, "Oh no," he said, "I'm doing this in obedience to dreams and visions that tell me to pursue music." Now, music in the Greek, that had a broader than to us. It was both song and poetry and, you know, instrumental music.
Oh, so it didn't include like painting and
Well, the muses were, but I think music was set off here. But yeah,
Okay.
the muses were also, for painting or dancing or whatever. But he said, yeah, there's receiving dreams of visions, and so he. And then he goes on to tell a story about the Greeks had a folk belief that just before swans die, they sing the most beautiful songs of all. And so that was his swan song, was writing those poems. And so I read that in 1962, and I remember it like it was yesterday. All right. Now flash forward, it was 1974. I was in my second year of medical school, and I was doing my surgery rotation. And I walked in, I was the first one in the room, and the protocol is the first one starts the resuscitation. So we walked into, my two attendings were behind me, and I walked in, and this woman was having a cardiac arrest right before our eyes. She was in her 70s. And so I started the resuscitation, and she was reciting poetry as she was dying.
No kidding.
Yeah, and I couldn't, I didn't have the presence of mind, but I could tell the meter and the rhyme, right? And subsequently, I have hundreds of these. I mean, it's very rare compared to near-death experiences, but it's common enough that anybody who wants to investigate can find cases of people who, just before they die, they break into song, or they sing, or they recite poetry. Sometimes they even make up poetry on the spot. So, the music, as you were talking about, see, this has a spiritual level to it as well.
Yeah, it really does seem to. So this is what interests me in nonsense. There are a couple of things that really interest me. Looking at my own past, I can see it operative in my own spirituality for sure, right? Yeah. Since I've sat with you and talked about this. And now I feel like I can employ it better since I now can identify it. I'm conscious of it, right?
That's right.
So this is really a tool.
Yes,
this is a tool for expanding one's consciousness.
Yeah.
So the notion of speaking in tongues has credibility.
Oh, it absolutely does to me. I've done it many times. I mean, it's extraordinary. Mm-hmm. You get into a state of consciousness that is just profound. And like I said, I could understand where God might be, I might be more receptive to God in that state. However, I mean, it's, to me, I sort of talk to God all the time. So, but it's, you can see how if it was some unfamiliar state to somebody, they could easily find God in that way. You get away from the concerns of the world and from this realm entirely into some other realm of consciousness that really it feels a lot closer to God. It does, than ordinary waking consciousness.
Yeah, it's almost like you can feel its power.
Yeah.
Now I don't know what that is. Maybe it does exert some power spiritually that we don't otherwise sense, but and maybe it has some function that way.
Well, what it does is that it takes us over a chasm. Like, go back in your mind, Brett, to the year 1915, and be an educated, well-educated, very informed person of 1915. And now listen to the following three sentences. Sentence number 1, all 4 of Ethel's grandparents perished and were lost in a shipwreck long before her mother and father were born. In 1915, that's totally nonsense, right?
Yeah.
Now add the knowledge that the role of DNA and heredity, the concept of gene splicing, gene editing, and cloning, and you've got an intelligible scenario. It hasn't happened yet, but we can make sense of it, that sentence.
Yes.
you know, in 1915, you hear you read the newspaper. It's like there were 6 marriages were recorded at City Hall yesterday. 2 were between a woman and a man. 2 were between a man and a man, and 2 were between a woman and a woman. In 1915, that's totally unintelligible. Right? Or in 1915, hear this, I watched a movie on my phone this morning. So to me, it's no deterrent at all that something is unintelligible. It makes it more interesting. That wonderful physics professor from, I think, Manhattan or NYU, you see him, the guy with the long hair on Dr. Kaku, I think his name is.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and I saw one of his things. Mikio, yeah. Oh, he's so cool, isn't he?
He is,
just
yeah.
the greatest guy. And so I heard him say, he said, you know, the 2 strongest physical theories ever developed were general relativity and the quantum theory. He said, but the trouble is when you combine the equations of them, you get complete, total, unintelligible nonsense. But we don't abandon it for that reason. In science, nonsense is like a placeholder. It's something we hold on to until we anticipate that something better will come along. Or singers do it. I've watched Elvis in this concert. It was just so amazing because he forgot the words. But I noticed that nobody in the audience, I was watching closely, nobody picked up on it because he just started mumbling nonsense in the rhythm, and then when he remembered the words, so nonsense was the placeholder, right, till he could remember the words. I don't know, but nobody picked up on it, right?
Yeah, one of our worship leaders does that sometimes.
Well, you know, that's fine. I mean, it's in reality, and, you know, it's to talk about God is nonsense in terms of the language of this world, and that's how it should be. I mean, God is higher than language, and so, you know, we can't capture God in language. It's, you know, you got to sort of get as close as you can with nonsense or with figures of speech.
Yeah, that's why a lot of theologians will say we've got to get the church to drop the idea of the Holy Quartet: Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and Bible.
Yeah, that's right. And the Trinity was back in the Middle Ages. Now I gather it's a kind of doctrine, but back in the Middle Ages it was like a Cohen.
Yeah.
See, it was you would kind of meditate on it. You would think about the Trinity, and the idea was to get you closer, I guess, emotionally or in your feelings to the identity of God.
Oh yeah, the Cappadocian Fathers. In their writings about the Trinity, they weren't trying to give some kind of, it doesn't appear anyway that they were trying to give some dogmatic formula for understanding the unintelligible.
That's right.
They were just saying that it is, and the way they describe it though is beautiful. They describe it in words that mean circle dance. And so there is this continual motion of relationship occurring.
Oh, yeah. It does. It happens.
There was a famous icon painting done by a Russian Orthodox in the 1700s, I think. And in his depiction of the Trinity, you have, of course, there's a lot of symbolism there, but that I haven't researched, but what is really noticeable at first is you have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit seated around a table, and then at the bottom of the painting, the researchers found that there was like a glue residue there, and they think that there used to be a mirror fixed to the bottom of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that there's this ongoing circle dance between God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and you.
And you, by gazing into the mirror, the painting would come alive.
I'm sure, yeah.
You can do that. It's amazing. You just take a painting or something and you put a mirror down and you look not at the painting but at the image in the mirror. I have a picture of Jesus that my grandma had on her wall, and just by looking at it in the mirror, you can see Jesus come alive.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Try it. It helps also if you get like in a darker room, so you can like by candlelight or watch. But you watch, and it will just take on a life of its own.
Yeah, I don't know if I told you this. My wife wants me to build a mirror gazing room
Oh, cool.
for
yeah.
her.
Yeah. Cool.
So I said I would consult with you. And
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's easy, you know. I mean, it's just, well, we can happily do it. And you know, it was, I got this communication from a guy years ago. It was before 2015, because I remember where I was living at the time. But he was a professor of religious studies at Cambridge University in England. And what he was saying, but he had read my book, and he said that this was on mirror gazing, and he said this was part of the early Christian. He said it was part of what they called the bridal chamber, and it was various kind of techniques they had, and one of them was the mirror gazing. But then in 300, what he explained was that then when the ideology became more important than the experience, then they made it. One of the words were, "It is anathema for a Christian to believe that a spirit can be seen in a mirror." So that means that up to 300 and whatever it was, that was accepted.
and probably fairly common.
Fairly common. Everybody knew about it.
Yeah.
See, this is, and everybody, if we go back to our great-grandparents' time, Brett, everybody knew about this. It's in the Victorian era, it was everybody knew that you could set up a mirror in your living room, and with a candle you could see spirits. It was just part of the folklore. And I have a lot of iconography on this, but the trouble is it drops out about 1915. And you see all these pictures of this, the mirrors and the spirits and all. But then what I think probably happened was radio, when people started listening to the radio and then watching TV, instead of interacting with each other in the living room, gazing into the mirror, they were preoccupied with the device.
Yeah.
Yeah.
God knows I've passed on my meditation times to keep scrolling through TikTok or YouTube.
Yeah, it's very hypnotic, I'm sure, if you know how to use computers.
It is, yeah.
Thank God I don't know how to use computers.
Yeah, it's got its ups and downs like anything, I guess. But well, so the speaking in tongues specifically has, that's a Christian kind of expression for nonsense, right?
Yeah. And also, don't use some of the Gospel of Thomas, for example. That seems to me, if you read it, it looks like erasure to me. And so it was, kind of, that was the point of that language, was that it was to put you in a certain kind of receptive state.
Oh, yeah. No,
Yeah.
I can see that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fascinating
It is an
work.
amazing piece of work, isn't it?
And part of it is very, very old. So it's
Yeah.
as old as the gospel accounts by
Yep,
some
that's right.
scholarly estimations.
Yeah, but it's one thing about Christianity that I'm just so fascinated by in my reading about it, but people are so loath to admit or acknowledge, but it's from the very beginning it was a religion of conflict, internal conflict and factions and hatreds and burnings, and it's still that way, it's still a division thing. But that's all right. That's divisions help us kind of get clear about things.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think it will be all right. When I talk to people about this, that's kind of where my education was in religion and culture, right?
Uh-huh.
And you just see the cycle taking place, And yeah, we're in the difficult side of the cycle right now with all the division and kicking and screaming about a lot of nonsense, really.
Yeah.
But it'll be okay.
And some of the
up.
greatest figures got, chopped out of the system, like Origen, for example. He was very big up until about 300 or 400, and then he's a heretic.
Yeah.
But he's fascinating. Oh, my God.
He became a heretic 200 years later.
That's right.
Justinian was that guy. Yeah, he. In fact, he's the namesake of our worship band.
Oh wow! He was what a fascinating character, and it's too bad that he
heard
had
once,
to be expunged.
Yeah, well, who cares? Justinian can go to hell now. He didn't though. I don't really care about that. The fact is, the guy was brilliant. And
Yes.
I heard that he was so prolific in his authorship of stuff, his writing, that he had a team of scribes that would just sit there and write down.
Wow, what he was saying all the time.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
He acknowledged that we have a conscious experience before we come in here.
Yes.
And I've learned that from my kids.
That was one of the things they wanted to pin on him. That,
exactly.
Was anathema.
But it's absolutely true. My kids both adopted at birth, both told me, they both told us where they were before in a way that we couldn't deny. I mean, it was absolutely the case. And, yeah.
Did I tell you this last time we talked? I have this memory, which could certainly be a constructed memory, but it's very vivid. And anyone who knows me well, that in and of itself is kind of a miracle, because my memory has been scarred since I'm 3 years old. I had meningitis, and anyway.
My goodness, Brett. Sorry.
But this memory I have is of my christening.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
In a dark, Roman Catholic setting, and it's in the first person. So I can see the priest, and I can see the vessel that he used to pour the water on me.
Yeah.
I can see my aunt and uncle standing there.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's a constructed
Well,
memory.
see, I have the I remember. I remember something that happened when I was 2 years and August, September. 2 years and 4 months old. I can remember something I know absolutely happened. And, there's a doctrine that people don't remember things before they were 5 years old. That's just nuts. I'm sorry. I mean, when you really get to know people, I've, been with hundreds and hundreds of people in a therapeutic setting. We do remember sometimes, we remember things from before that magic 5-year limit.
I have another memory of when I was in the hospital with the meningitis, but it is an out of body experience. I'm just realizing this as I'm sitting here talking with you.
Yeah.
I'd remembered it before, but I'm just now making the connection that, I saw myself standing. I was in a crib, and I was excited because the nurse was coming in, and that probably meant I was going to get Jell-O or something, I don't remember what I was thinking or anything, but I remember the nurse coming in, and I remember seeing myself.
Yeah. Reality is consensual reality. There's something wrong with it. But it's the best we got. Too, the story. I have a friend whose name is Anthony Chicoria, and Anthony is a PhD in physiology, an MD.
He's a bone guy, right?
And an amazingly renowned orthopedic surgeon. I think he taught at NYU. And in 1994, Anthony was struck in the neck by a bolt of lightning. He had a cardiac arrest. And had the regular things, out of his body, seeing into this hyper-real environment. But then later on, is like shortly thereafter, he had, out of nowhere, he got interested in the piano, like never any interest before, but he kept having a recurrent dream in which he was playing the same piece of music on a piano on a concert stage. So he learned how to transcribe music and transcribe the piece, and learned how to play the piano. And now, in addition to being a famed orthopedic surgeon, he's also a concert pianist. Now, here he had a recent concert in Vienna. And, that does not occur in order. There's something wrong with consensual reality. Yeah. And something like that shows it. It's, that doesn't fit in. But, there's a great energy that's put into denying all these things, because we want to focus on this life in a way, and if all these things were bombarding you from the other side, you would have a harder time concentrating on this life. But that doesn't mean they're not there. And you know what's happening, Brett, is the afterlife is kind of becoming infused in this life. You go back to 1950, near-death experiences occurred, but they were extremely rare.
Yeah.
They were known in antiquity. But then in the 60s and 70s, with the advent of cardiopulmonary resuscitation, now they're in every, those resuscitators are in every department store. And so that means that millions and millions of people have experienced something that has always been but was once extremely rare. So we're in a situation now that I would guess that probably everybody, practically everybody, knows somebody who's had a near-death experience. And some people have had multiple near-death experiences, often because of a heart condition over years. So they kind of come in and out, right? So the afterlife is becoming infused into this life is what's happening.
Yeah, I think I might have mentioned this before. I've put a label on what I see as these common threads between psychedelics, deep trance hypnosis or meditation, and near-death experiences, shared death experiences, and the spirituality that is emerging from that collective data.
Yeah.
I call it soulistic progress.
Yeah.
Because they all seem to point to the progress of the soul.
Yeah.
As the point of all of this. And not only do you see that in what they believe, but you see this progress in their lives.
Yes.
Much more so than you see in someone who just ran to the altar boohooing one day.
There you go. Exactly.
You see very little transformation because it's such a transactional kind of thing.
That's right.
But in soulistic progress, which you see in Christians and Hindus and Buddhists, you see it everywhere. And it must be at least impacted by all of this collective research that's been done. I don't know what you think. I know you know Dr. Weiss.
Yeah.
But I don't think I asked you, what do you think is occurring there in his hypnosis patients? Do you think they're actually experiencing past lives?
Well,
and their near-death experiences of those lives?
What I think on that is complicated, and I really admit that before I ever did one myself, back in the 80s, I was teaching at a university, and my students got very interested in this past life regression. So that's why I started doing it, just because my students were curious.
You started hypnotizing them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I would do it one-on-one. And, I did a couple of hundred of them over the years, maybe more. And but I was expecting that it would be only a very histrionic person who would experience it. And, I'd heard vaguely everybody is either Napoleon or Cleopatra. I just didn't know about it. And when I started doing it, I must say I was surprised. But Brian Weiss put me through it once, and I was startled because I am an excellent daydreamer, Brett. I have got it down. I'm so skilled at it. And I know all the techniques for sealing yourself off so nobody can interrupt your daydream and stuff. But this was not a daydream. I'm really good at images, but in my daydreams, I try to get the images as sharp as possible, but it's just kind of nowhere, right?
Right.
But this was not a daydream. This was hyper-photographic reality. Mm. And I was astonished by the way that I could be inside the character, but it was kind of a turnstile mechanism. I could also just be outside of the character, watching what the character was doing.
Right.
And so I just don't know what to make about it. But I do know that these things also happen a lot spontaneously, and that I'm more interested in. And where it came to me was I was lived in a regular neighborhood with the man across the street, an economics professor. The man to the right owned a car dealership. The guy catty-cornered was an accountant, and so this is and not a group that would be interested in these sort of things, but they knew about my book. So during the years I lived there, it happened maybe 3-4 times that people in the neighborhood would bring their 3 or 4-year-old kids, and their concern was there must be something wrong with him, telling about where they were before they came, and I just didn't know what to make of it. But I would talk to the kids, and I was obviously not anything wrong with the kid. I couldn't tell them what it was, but I told them it wasn't anything serious, or
wasn't a mental illness.
It wasn't mental illness. And so then then it happened to my own kids adopted at birth, and so that is impressive. And another thing I've seen is if you read Toynbee's Study of History, which is 11 volumes, which I read. When you get to the 11th volume, he explains how he got interested in the study of history. And I think it was in the 20s or somewhere in there, and he spent a summer in Greece, touring around in Greece. And he said several times, out of nowhere, he said, I dropped through a pocket in time. And you could tell that he thought he interpreted it as a real event. And he said the present would just disappear and the past would spring up. And I would see all these things. And on one of these episodes, saw this horrific battle going on. And he said, I decided then and there to study history, to try to find out the role of sin in the affairs of humankind. And Gibbon said a similar thing about an experience he had. And I've had 2 history professors over the years spontaneously come up to me and say, the way I got started in studying history was this very thing.
Really?
They were transported back in time. This man in the Canary Islands was a professor of something in history in Europe, and he said that years before he and his wife had been touring around Europe, and they went into this cathedral, and he said there was a mural on the wall, and he said a tunnel of concentric circles opened up between him and this man became alive, and they carried on this conversation, and that's why he became a history professor, because I guess he saw directly the living history kind of. Yeah. So, something odd is going on. And David Hume, the great skeptic, said, he said the only kind of afterlife that he felt the philosophical person could entertain would be reincarnation. He doesn't go on to explain why, but I suspect it's because as a historian he would have realized the role of narrative in human affairs is just, narrative is what it's all about.
Oh, yeah.
Even consciousness is narrative-based.
Yeah.
Right? Because, yeah.
Yeah, no question about that. Well, we're out of time.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Didn't even get around to my Amway products.
And all of you need to know that, I came in here, we walked into the office earlier, and Kevin Kaiser was sitting there, and I said, what do you think that Ray and I should talk about today? And he just rattled off some nonsense, which was fascinating. No. Yeah, and but it's true. I didn't have any set topic to talk about. Yeah. I wanted to talk about nonsense, and I want to do that again.
We'll do that. It's a complicated subject. But it is mind-bending. I mean, I know enough to say with complete, certainty that you can absolutely, by teaching yourself how to think logically about nonsense, you can open up your mind to a whole new dimension of thinking. Yeah.
No, I believe that. Absolutely. I think I've experienced that. So I don't know. It might have been appropriate, but maybe not, to end this whole talk with some babbling, but
Yeah.
or jazz scatting or something. But
Yeah.
I
Well,
don't
or
know.
how about this?
Or a Dr.
'Twas
Seuss.
brillig and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. Holiness breeds the vestigial lipstick of spontaneity. That cannibal you men just ate was the last one in this city. And hat thoroughly the if will zoom how zest or me malokori yala bakoshinama blakinada. So
Should have bought a Honda. Should have bought a Honda. Should have
yes,
bought a Honda.
that's right.
Thanks,
And
man.
kids love it too. It's yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now we know why.
Hey, thank you so much, Brett, and thanks also for all the folks listening in. I really, it's a great honor to me. I mean, I'm not into honors. I try to keep my self-esteem as low as possible, but it's really nice that people would listen to a 79-year-old man who, is fascinated by Greek philosophy. I'm just, I know that's sounds boring, but that I'm
No,
just
it
so.
doesn't.
I'm seriously grateful to everybody who
Me too.
listens to my work. Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Well, we're grateful for your work. Thank you.